Hello, this is Sarah Economides. I'm a physical therapist at Madonna Rehab Hospital here in Lincoln, and I will be presenting this lecture for you. This is the first one in a series of 3 talking about pediatric content. So today we're going to go over normal development, reflexes, reactions, and then some standardized assessments for kids. I've done this lecture for past several years with Bridget, but this is the first time I've done it online, so bear with me and hopefully everything comes through okay. So in the womb, when we're thinking about motor development, reflexes are the first thing that help us move. They always start before we can have any volitional or purposeful movement for any movement that we have. You're going to have generalized before localized. So you're going to get big arm movements, legs kicking, swiping before you get little pincher, finger grasp movements, those kind of things. Along those lines goes gross motor before fine motor. Babies are going to roll and crawl and sit before they can do very fine and detailed movement. You're going to get proximal before distal, so in order to have control of your arms and your hands, you've got to have that trunk and head control first. And then typically you get head control before you get leg control and standing and weight bearing, those kind of things. So that cephalad before caudal movement. We have 3 different kind of developmental reflexes that we're going to go through. The first is primitive reflexes. Those start in the brainstem. They're basic reflexes that we have for protecting ourselves, for survival, breathing, swallowing, eating, those kind of things. All of those start as reflexes. They also are there so that we can start to learn how to move against gravity and develop those upright postural supports. Our riding reactions are helping us to be aware of where we are in space. So making sure that your body knows where midline is, being able to come back to midline if you've lost your balance, maintaining stability while you're changing positions, all of those kind of developmental things that kids do. The third is the equilibrium or protective reaction. So when you go beyond the ability to come back to midline from a riding reaction, if your big brother shoves you, you've got to be able to protect yourself. So putting your hand out to stop yourself from falling, keeping your balance, mainly there to protect your head from injury. So what are primitive reflexes? They start out as an involuntary muscle reaction that is in response to a very specific stimulation. You're going to get a consistent response each time, but as the children get older and they develop those purposeful volitional movements, those reflexes are going to go away. They're going to have the ability to overpower them and do that movement that they want to do. For some kids, you might see persistence of primitive reflexes beyond the age that they're supposed to have them. If that does happen, that can be a sign of damage to the central nervous system, whether it was cerebral palsy, a brain injury acquired after birth, or any other developmental disorder, that kind of thing. The same could be said with asymmetry. So some of the reflexes that we're going to go through, you have to one side and then to the other side, but maybe a child has a very strong one that they cannot overcome to one side, and then they have absent on the other side. That could also indicate an injury to one side of the brain. First primitive reflexes that we're going to go through are rooting and Moro. The rooting reflex is one where you stroke the side of the baby's cheek right around in the corner of their mouth. Their response is they will turn towards that stimulation. This is helpful for when you're indicating whether a baby is hungry or not. So trying to root towards the mother's breast or a bottle. If they're full, if they've just eaten, they're not going to respond as much. If you also do it multiple times, they're not really going to respond either. They become habituated to that response. So they won't always do it, but the first couple of times they should turn towards it if they're hungry or if they're interested. When we talk about onset and integration ages, whenever on these slides it says weeks, that's considering gestational age. So a normal full-term pregnancy is 40 weeks. So a lot of these reflexes will have started before a baby is born. So 28 weeks, that's a viable age. If a baby is born prematurely, they can survive outside the womb. So on very early preterm babies, we can start to see some of these reflexes. So rooting starts about 28 weeks, and then integration age, it goes away about 3 months post-term. So from that 40-week gestational age, that reflex will go away when they're 3 months old from expected due date, basically. When we're looking at other problems that could happen if the rooting reflex doesn't go away, if a child is constantly still responding to that after that age when they're starting to eat table food, it can interfere with being able to bring a fork to a mouth or a spoon. If something brushes their cheek and they're turning their head away, it could cause them to lose balance. But overall, just interfering with that normal oral motor development so that they can't progress with their eating to in an age-appropriate way. Moro reflex is a startle reflex that we see in babies starting at about 28 weeks gestation, and then it goes away when they're about 5 or 6 months old. Basically, the stimulus for this one is you hold them in a semi-reclined sitting position, supporting their head and their shoulders, and then you quickly release your hands. So you let them fall back just at 20 to 30 degrees, still supporting them, but you're going to see a startle response of their arms going out, their fingers opening, everything, arms kind of extending. Because it's a startle response that can be kind of upsetting to a baby sometimes. So this is, if we're doing an assessment with a kiddo, this is one that I would save till the end. I don't do it right at the beginning. If it's going to scare a baby, you don't want them crying for the rest of your assessment. So you do have to be careful when you're assessing this one. Challenge if it persists though, it goes away right around the time that babies are starting to sit up on their own. If they continue to have that reflex, it's going to continue to make them lose their balance backwards because they can't start to purposefully move their arm to protect themselves. And then it will cause challenges with progressing independent sitting.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Got a good suck. I'm looking for that. That's a good suck. Okay. We can actually demonstrate a root by just stroking the side of the face. It should seek for that. And it's seeking for that, and that's a very good root reflex. I'm just looking for that. Okay. Very good. Okay.
We're going to go through and have a series of videos kind of interspersed between all of these slides. The videos all have sound with them. You can listen to it, watch them. We're going to play this afterwards. I don't know if you'll be able to play it on your own more than once. This one is going to show a baby rooting.
We can elicit the Moreau reflex by having him relax, unsuspecting, and then give him a sudden stimulus, and there's a good Moreau. Quiet and headline, midline, and then just give the stimulus of dropping him back a few inches, and that's a good normal response. Okay.
This baby actually responds very well to the Moro reflex. Doesn't cry, definitely is startled. So you see those arms coming out, eyes widen, but then relaxes and calms down quite quickly. And you can definitely see too that the person performing the assessment is still supporting the baby's head and neck appropriately, knowing this is a newborn exam, and so not expecting the baby to be able to hold his head up on his own. All right, the next reflexes we're going to talk about are palmar and plantar grasp. So both of them, onset is about 28 weeks gestational age. Palmar grasp goes away earlier than plantar grasp. So the stimulus for both of these, for palmar would be an adult's finger pressing right into the palm of the baby's hand, and they're going to grasp your finger. A lot of parents will say, oh my goodness, look at, they're so strong, they hold onto my finger, they're so smart. It is a reflex. So babies will do this without purposeful movement if you give them that stimulus enough times, or at least the first couple of times. After a while, they might habituate to it and not respond as much. And then it goes away about 4 to 5 months old. That 4 to 5 months time is when babies start to have more of an open palm grasp and they're holding on to toys more purposefully. This grasp reflex does help babies develop their voluntary grasping, releasing motor patterns. For plantar grasp, this one doesn't go away until a little bit later, more about 9 months old. But you stimulate it the same way. You're going to put pressure to the sole of the foot, but it's really right about the ball of the foot, underneath the toes, along horizontally on the foot. And so you put pressure there, they're going to curl their toes around your finger, just like curling their fingers around your finger for the hand. If you think about when we talked earlier, cephalad before caudal, hands are closer to the brain than the feet. You're not expected to stand before you can sit, and so this corresponds to going away when babies are working on standing, walking along support surfaces. As they get their weight through their feet, that reflex is going to go away. If it stays too long, it can cause problems with balance and standing and gait down the line.
Look at the position of the hand. The hand should be able to open and close, but most of the time it is in a closed state, but not a tight closed state. We can elicit a grasp reflex by again putting the hand right there in the thumb, and again the baby is able to grasp. We can open the hand by stroking the side of the hand, and then just stimulating a grasp reflex just by again putting the hand right there and have a grasp reflex. Okay. Now I'm seeing a good grasp reflex there. This is a good grasp reflex there. In fact, you can simulate the grasp reflex and then lift the baby. If we can get him to be quiet there, you can see he's almost pulling himself up as far as the grasp reflex and able to hold on with that hand. As far as just putting pressure here at the ball of the foot, and the toe should come down in a flexion, which he does. And should grasp. Let's look over here. And you can see that there's a grasp reflex.
So with this video, he's going to go through and assess the grasp reflex on the baby several times, and then he's going to almost pull the baby to sitting. We're looking in that portion for the baby to continue to hold on to his fingers, but also actually bend their arms, try and pull with their shoulders, do a little bit of a chin tuck. That's called a traction reflex. We're not going to go into that one as much. It's not as tested as often, but it's that precursor to a pull to sit movement. After that, he's going to look at the plantar reflex on the baby. You'll see it more prominent on one side than the other, but it's still normal. The more tired a baby is, the less you're going to see these motor responses. So if a baby's very, very relaxed, falling asleep, you might not get as good of a response during those times. The next one we're going to talk about is asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, or ATNR, as it's more commonly called. This one onset age is a little later, so anywhere from birth, that 40 weeks gestational age, to about 2 months old is when you'll start to see it, and then it goes away about 4 to 6 months after normal birth. The stimulation for this one is if the baby's laying on their back, you're going to turn their head to one side, which can sometimes cause a baby to fight you a little bit. So you'll see this reflex more often naturally if the baby's turning their own head, but you can stimulate it by you physically turning their head. The response that you should see is towards the side that the baby is now looking. So if you turn their head to the right, their right arm and leg should extend and their left arm and leg will both bend. So we call this a fencing posture or archer posture. So it looks like they're drawing a bow a little bit when they're doing it. Typically you see more response with the arm than the leg, but depending on the kid, you will see both or possibly just the arm. they will be able to move out of this position, and that's normal and good. If they cannot move out of it, that's problematic. Usually that is a sign of more of that central nervous system injury or insult, because it should never be, any reflex should never be fully obligatory. And what I mean by that is that they shouldn't have to do it 100% of the time. So like we've already talked about, it's normal for them to habituate, to decrease their response to that stimulus that you're giving them because they get used to it, so that they shouldn't always have to do those movements. Same thing with the ATNR. You might do it once and it can be strong. The next time you do it, it'll be a little bit. The third time you do it, they're going to fight you and keep turning, and their arms and legs are just going to be kicking and you won't even see the reflex. That's normal. For ATNR specifically, if it persists, if it doesn't go away when it's supposed to, they're going to have a big problem with learning how to roll, because if that arm that they're turning their head towards, they want to roll that way because they're motivated by a toy, but if that arm is sticking straight out, they're not going to be able to roll over it. It's going to inhibit that movement. It'll also cause problems with being able to bring their hands to midline, visual attention towards midline. If they turn their head and they get stuck in that position, and then they turn their head towards middle, but then they kind of get stuck going all the way to the other side and they get stuck in that ATNR position the opposite direction, that's also going to cause problems. If they get old enough and it's still there with sitting, ATNR also pulls on your trunk or your torso, not just your arms and your neck. So I have worked with kids where they do get stuck and this really is their only mode of movement. So they turn their head and they go that direction, and it's good. We want them to be able to move, but we want them to be able to move purposefully and outside of those positions as well.
We put his head in midline. Okay. He's moving both sides. He wants to turn a little bit this way. Put him this way, and we get into somewhat of an asymmetric tonic neck. We can see this hand extended and this leg extended and the other side flexed. But he can overcome that. He's not obligate. We'd go over this way. Let's turn your head this way. And again, we should see he doesn't like that much. This hand extend and this foot extend and this side flex over here. Okay, that's an asymmetric tonic neck. Coming back over here again. And oftentimes we'll see the side where the head is turned towards an extension as far as the leg and the hand, and the other side in flexion, but he doesn't get stuck in that, and he shouldn't be. He should be able to get out of that.
So this baby is about 3 months old, very active 3-month-old. When he's working on doing the ATNR, you'll notice he's trying to turn the baby's head away from him, but the baby's really interested in looking towards the guy doing the assessment. And so you'll see his left arm and leg bend more, and the right arm and leg straighten more as he's trying to look towards the physician. But as he tries to get him to turn away, the baby gets upset and you just get more random movements, and that's a normal response. If he's actively trying to move outside of that reflex position, that's good. We want him to be able to overcome that, move out of it, and you might not see that reflex. That's okay. The next set of reflexes we're going to talk about are the tonic labyrinthine reflex and the symmetrical tonic neck reflex, or STNR. For tonic labyrinthine, onset is birth. Doesn't really matter, prematurity or full-term delivery, and it goes away about 6 months after birth. So basically, if you put them on their back in supine, they're going to have more extension because of the pressure of gravity on their body. If you put them more in prone, they're going to have more of a flexed posture, with gravity helping them maintain that physiologic flexion that all babies are born with. So when they first come out of the womb, they have muscle contractures in their hamstrings, their dorsiflexors, their hip flexors. All of that takes time to relax, but gravity helps smooth that out. And then beyond that, it's more challenging when they're in prone to actively extend their body out of those positions too. So gravity helps them keep that physiologic flexion. But as they get older and stronger, 6 months old, they're able to hold their head up. They're working on sitting. They have more motor control to defeat that reflex, basically. If they're not able to habituate to that or outgrow it, if it persists, you're going to have a lot of problems with coming up over midline, head control against gravity, working on your visual motor reflexes, those kind of things. For the symmetric tonic neck reflex, this one's a little bit harder to think about, but we've got some pictures on the next slide that you can look at. Onset is a lot later, so about 4 to 6 months old, kind of around when the tonic labyrinthine reflex integrates, and it goes away around 8 to 12 months. It's a pretty big range, but it varies depending on the development of the kid. So if you're holding the child on your hand or just suspending them in air and you lift their head up, you're going to see them move into almost hands and knees position. So when their head is lifted up, their arms are going to extend as to put weight through their hands, and their hips and knees are going to bend as to put weight through their knees on the ground. If you put their heads down, their arms are going to bend and their legs will straighten out so that they can almost lay down. This is a precursor reflex to help them get into a quadruped position, but if it persists, keeping both arms straight and both knees bent or vice versa, you're going to have a lot harder time learning how to crawl. And so that, as they have developed that volitional movement to work on reciprocal crawling, that is when that reflex integrates or goes away, so they can overcome it and then they're not obligated to kind of just be in that quadruped position. Persistence would obviously limit learning how to crawl, any other reciprocal movement as well, so things like walking, that would be more challenging too. So again, the pictures on this slide just kind of indicate, especially down in the left-hand corner, what that symmetrical tonic neck reflex would look like. Lifting the baby's head, you get into that quadruped position. Putting the baby's head in a flexed position, you're going to have more of a relaxed, laying down on your tummy type of a position. Tonic labyrinthine, I only have the supine one in there, but if you can picture a newborn baby laying on their belly, their arms are tucked underneath, their legs are tucked underneath, their head is kind of down, they're much more in a flexed ball-like position. The standing reflex is going to come on about 32 weeks gestational age, so it's a little bit later, but it also goes away pretty early. It goes away about 1 to 2 months post-term delivery. For this reflex, the stimulation, you're going to support the baby right around their trunk, underneath their armpits, and you're going to lower them down so that their feet come in contact with a support surface, whether it's your lap or the bed or the changing table, doesn't matter. The response that you should see when both of their feet come in contact is the baby will extend their hips and knees. So they'll turn on their hip and knee extensors, they'll weight bear through their legs, not for a very long amount of time sometimes, but they should respond to that pressure on their feet. Some kiddos that have generalized, they're just a little loosey-goosey kiddo. They have hypotonia, they're weaker, children with Down syndrome. You might not see this reflex as much. Just because they don't have the ability to support themselves against gravity. It is a prerequisite. You've got to be able to do the standing reflex before you can do the stepping reflex. So the stepping reflex starts about 38 weeks gestational age, and it also goes away around 2 months old. Same position, but now once both of their feet are on the floor, you help them weight shift onto one leg, and that leg that now is unweighted should reflexively flex up, like a withdrawal almost. And then as you shift them back, they'll put it down and pick up the other foot. Parents will say a lot of times with these reflexes, oh my gosh, again, my baby's so smart, look at, they're already learning how to walk. But then sometimes they get nervous because this reflex goes away so early. But the reason that it goes away is because around 2 to 3 months old, babies start to chub up a little bit more. They get heavier, but they haven't grown enough to change their physiologic strength. So their bones are still really short, but they weigh more, so they cannot generate enough force to really push and step and do that. So that reflex integrates fairly early just because of their weight. And then as they learn how to stand and step again, it's purposeful, so that when they're older and standing, they're moving on purpose. They're not just reflexively moving their legs. But both of these reflexes help them learn how to stand upright against gravity, The stepping reflex is what we call a central pattern generator, or CPG, for volitional walking, weight shifting as they get older towards those ages where kids learn how to walk and stand on their own.
Now we're going to put him in vertical suspension. And again, I should be able to hold on to him and have strength here in the shoulder girdle so he doesn't just slip through my fingers. So that's good. Okay.
So this isn't the greatest video to show the standing reflex, partly because the baby's a little fussy. He's not really responding too well to being held in that position. But you can see he does receive weight on his feet for at least a second or two before he picks his feet up again.
We're going to do the walking reflex and see if he'll take some steps here. Okay. Bring some steps. There you go. All right. Okay. All right.
So again, this is the same baby. He's still not super happy, and you can see he's not really receiving weight great on his feet. But once he gets a little bit madder, actually, he does start to have that reciprocal withdrawal pattern of opposite leg, just one pulling up at a time, even though he's not extending and putting a whole lot of weight on that stance foot. The gallant reflex is going to start about 30 to 32 weeks gestational age. It's going to iterate or go away when they're about 2 months old. The stimulus for this one is holding the baby face down on their belly or resting them on your lap, and you're going to just draw your finger down from about the bottom edge of their scapula on one side of their perispinals or lateral trunk, and the response that you should see is that their lower trunk is going to curve towards that side of the stimulus. You should get this to both sides, hopefully equally. If it persists, then you're going to cause problems with sitting balance down the line. So if something accidentally touched them and they couldn't help but curve over towards that stimulus, then they would lose their balance pretty consistently. Also, if you have one side stronger than the other where they get this response and it persists, you can end up with scoliosis because of that constant curvature towards that one side. For the Landau reflex, this is the one we kind of call Superman. This comes on a little bit later, about 3 to 4 months post-term delivery, and it goes away a little later too, anywhere from 1 to 2 years old. So that's a pretty wide range, but it's normal. It kind of just depends on the kid's development. So this one, again, you're going to hold them face down in the air around their trunk. And what you should see is that their head, their shoulders and upper trunk, their hips, legs, everything extends, so they're kind of flying through the air like Superman. Their arms are going to be probably down by their hips, not in front of them, but that's the response that you're looking for. If a kiddo is a little bit weaker, if they have more hypotonia, they're a little loosey-goosey, you're not going to get as good of a response. This reflex helps to break that overall flexor tone. So think about that tonic labyrinthine reflex. And also helps develop their head and trunk control against gravity so that they can do more sitting, standing, purposeful upright movements.
One other reflex we're going to do is the gallant, which is the incurvation. It's just stimulating one side of the trunk, and the trunk should go towards the stimulus. We're going through the shirt here, which oftentimes is, there we go. And the buttocks or the body moves towards the stimulus. Here's a good strong one on this side.
So when watching this video, the baby definitely responds a little bit more towards that stimulus for the gallant on the right side. But if you watch closely, he does, at least the second or third time that he does the stimulus, the baby does bring those hips towards the left side as well. He's also, again, starting to get a little fussy, so you're not going to get the best response when he's mad.
And again, he gets his head up and is maintaining it about the plane of his body. He's trying to get his legs up too. So he's opposing gravity at this point in time, just like he's going to be on in the prone position. So that's good.
So this baby is, again, about 3 months old. He has some really strong neck and trunk extensors for a 3-month-old. He's holding that position for quite a long time. After a while, gravity is going to overcome that, and he's going to kind of slump down, and that's normal. But then he might automatically try and pull back up again. But you can see how active he is through his entire body. His head is up, his arms are moving around, his whole trunk, lower trunk, hips, legs, they're all extended. And he's actively probably trying to look at his mom throughout this whole thing. All right, the next section we're going to move on to, all of those were primitive reflexes that help to progress that motor movement. So now we're going to look at righting reactions. All of these start at some point within the first year of life, and their main goal is to help us stand up and sit up, maintain that postural support against gravity. Pretty much all of these, you're going to continue to see them. They should start, and then you should always have them throughout the rest of your life, because as we grow, become adults, do more challenging things, you always need to be able to know where you are in space, right yourself, keep your balance, protect yourself, prevent yourself from falling. So the first ones that we're going to talk about are optical righting and labyrinthine righting. The stimulus for both of these is the same thing. The only difference is labyrinthine righting, you're covering their eyes so that they're using their vestibular system to right themselves as opposed to their visual system. So onset would be about when they're 2 months age post-term. Again, this one should be a reaction that persists, but you're going to hold the child up and then usually face them towards you, tip them to one side and watch, and you should see their head with both of these try and turn back towards midline. Same thing, you're going to go both side to side. They should do the same reaction towards each direction. Obviously, the older the child is, they're going to have better head control. 2-month-old babies are still kind of wobbly, so their head might not go great straight towards midline, but maybe their chin will turn up, or they'll try and then they'll kind of flop down a little bit. They won't be able to hold it, but they should go back towards midline. Both of these help to facilitate development of head control, prone head control, walking, all of those things that you need to be able to know where midline is in order to do. For us as adults, obviously, yes, this reflex persists, but if you're startled and you lose your balance, your automatic response is going to be to come towards midline with your head and your trunk. Even though if you purposefully tilt yourself, yeah, you can keep your head straight in line, you can let yourself fall, whatever you choose. But a startle type of reaction would be to come back towards the middle. Again, this just shows a picture of the labyrinthine righting. The optical righting would be the same thing with the baby's eyes open, tipping them towards the right, the head tilts towards the left in an effort to come back to midline. The next two reflexes or reactions are kind of paired again. Neck on body and body on body righting. They can be a little bit confusing to remember what's what. Both of them are involved in helping a baby learn how to roll. Neck on body is if you turn the child's head. If you go far enough, their body should start to come with and they will roll onto their side. Body on body is if you're rolling a child towards the right side, if you take their left leg, if you hold on to their upper thigh and pull it across towards the right side, the rest of their body should roll again also. So both of them are rolling, just neck on body is rolling from the head, body on body is rolling from the lower trunk. Both of them start about 34 weeks gestational age. They go away when the baby is about 4 to 5 months old. If you think about babies' development and rolling, about 4 to 5 months old is when babies can start to roll with some rotation purposefully. This reflex helps them to do that. If the older baby gets towards about that 4 months old, when it's going away, they're going to fight you too. They're not going to want to necessarily go with you. So you won't see that response anymore, or they'll actively push themselves back down unless they're trying to roll that way. So the next set of reactions are equilibrium and protective reactions, and these are ones that really help us keep our balance as we stand, walk, sit, and then protect yourself when you're shifting your center of gravity, changing for a more narrow base of support, and these definitely all persist as you get older. For the prone equilibrium reaction, onset is about 5 or 6 months old, and it again persists if you have a child laying on their belly and they're on a tilt board or a ball or just on your lap and you're rocking from side to side. You should automatically see their trunk, their spine curve in the opposite direction that you are tilting them, again in an effort to come back towards that midline position. Same thing for sitting. It just comes on a little bit later, about 7 or 8 months old, and again persists, but this time instead of laying on their belly, they're sitting on your lap or on that wobble board or therapy ball, and you're tilting them from side to side. But you should see that active trunk movement, muscle contraction to attempt to return to midline. So both of these reactions are helping them achieve and maintain their center of gravity, prone developing for upright, the sitting one developing for quadruped, for standing, for those more challenging balance tasks for gross motor skills. Protective reactions are ones that keep you safe. If you lose your balance outside of that righting reaction towards midline, if someone, your big brother, comes along and shoves you, big shove, so you can't even hope to come back to midline, you can put your hand out, stop yourself, protect yourself from falling. Forwards is the one that comes on first. All of these are going to be tested in sitting. So we've got forward, sideward, and then backwards. Forwards comes along 6 to 9 months of age. And if they're sitting on the floor, you just push them forward from behind. You should see their hands come up, protect themselves, reach out forwards to weight bear on their arms to keep themselves from falling. Same thing sideways. If they're sitting on the floor, you push one shoulder in the opposite direction. That side, that arm that you push them towards should come out and protect themselves to weight bear on that hand to keep themselves from falling, or at the very least slow themselves down. If they do indeed lose their balance, you push them hard enough. This one comes on around 7 to 8 months old, so it's a little bit later than forwards. And again, both of these are needed for good sitting balance, protecting yourself from a large loss of balance.
And we're just going to tip him up, catch his arms extended, reaching out to catch himself. That occurs about 8 months of age, and he's got well-developed postural reflex. Going out, spreading the hands, catching himself.
So this video is actually an example of the parachute reflex. So if you've got a baby or a kiddo laying on a ball in prone and you push them forwards, they're going to reach their arms out forward to weight bear. It's a little bit beyond just the regular forward protective reaction, but it's similar along the lines. This is the only video I had of that. All right, so the backwards protective reaction is the last one to come along, and its onset is about 9 to 10 months of age, and again, persists onward into adult life. This one, if you're sitting behind the child, I usually bring my hands around to the front of their shoulders and pull back. Or if you're sitting in front of them, you can push them back, but I usually like to sit behind them so that I can catch them just in case they haven't developed this reaction yet. But their arm should extend, their shoulder should extend to try and take weight as they're falling backwards, but they might also actively, turn on their abs, bring their head forward and try and pull themselves forward. So you got to give them a pretty strong push to get them to lose their balance beyond that just ability to kind of come back towards midline with their trunk muscles. With the development of all of these reactions, once they finally have the backwards protective reaction, that 9 to 10 months of age is when kids are really good and competent at sitting. You don't need to be anywhere around them. At this point, they're likely transitioning into quadruped, prone, rolling over, sitting back up on their own. At 5, 6, 7 months of age, they're just starting to sit without support consistently. So they're still going to lose their balance because they don't have all of those protective reactions developed yet, and they're not good at transitioning between positions. So if you think about it, if you've got little brothers or sisters or your own kids or nieces and nephews, you think about when they started being able to sit up and ages, as these protective reactions come on, they become more and more competent at sitting independently. All right, we've made it through references page. Go ahead, write down any questions you guys have. We'll see you in class on that first day. For the second lecture, we'll go through some of these items, and if you have any specific questions, we'll try and take a look at some of those things, maybe do a little bit of demonstration. If you have questions on some of those gross motor skills or reflexes items, let me know. Bridget can get me any information, and we can come prepared to discuss some of those things before we dive into the next lecture. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.